Anna. I'm one of the pastors here at Cokesbury, and I know many of you and others of you I haven't gotten to meet yet, but one thing that if you already know me, you probably know about me is that I'm into most sports. I love sports. I actually didn't grow up playing sports. I kind of did the dance, show choir, theater, that sort of thing, but I have always loved sports. I think part of that is because when I was first kind of becoming aware of sports, I was in middle school in like the mid-90s, and that is when the Braves won the World Series, UT won the national championship, and I thought like that's what it is when you cheer for sports. So it was a long time before I got to experience that again. Thankfully, the Braves have done it again, but we're still waiting on our Vols, one of their teams. But the UT men's Vols, the Lady Vols, they're doing pretty well this week. It's been fun. But I love sports. My husband and son are also very into sports, so we enjoy that together. Our daughter loves the snacks. She's very into that part, so we're going to try to bring her along with us eventually. But I love anything where, you can compete or somebody can win or, maybe I'm competing against myself, trying to do better than I've done before, or maybe we're on teams, even like board games, yard games, all that stuff. I love it all. I love anything like that. So that's probably why I think bowling is really fun. I think it's fun to go bowling. Like, you get in there, and when I was a kid, some of you are too young to remember this, but when I was a kid, you scored bowling with paper and a pencil. And they had all the little squares, and my parents taught me, I think they were secretly making me learn math stuff, and I thought it was just bowling, but you learn how to score the bowling game, the strike and the spare, and you color in the little squares. And, it was super fun. I loved doing that. We bowled, when I was a kid. Then when I was a teenager, our youth group at church, we would meet up before church or after something, and we would bowl, and just a way for everybody to hang out together. We thought that was really fun. My husband, Chris, and I have always loved to bowl together. I have beat him just a handful of times in the 20 years that we have been together, so I cherish those moments. But when we were in high school, before we started dating, we would go out on dates with other people, just regular old dates, and we would meet up afterwards and go bowling and talk about our dates. As it turns out, we were dating. We didn't really realize it at the time, but that was when we were having the most fun. So part of our relationship started that way. It's just a fun atmosphere. Good snacks, often good music. I have now reached the age where when they do some throwback music, it's my music. It's middle school music, and my kids are like, ugh, great. But it's just a fun vibe. It's a fun, atmosphere that you can go to. You sometimes see funny things happen. My kids and I went bowling at one of these places here close to the church a couple years ago, and we were just kind of, in our lane doing our bowling thing, and 2 lanes over, there were 2 moms with probably 6 or 7 young kids. Maybe the oldest kids they brought with them were in kindergarten, and the rest of the kids were younger. So maybe a bowling alley, not the top choice, but, sometimes you just got to do what you got to do to get through the day. So these moms have brought all these children bowling. And so we're just kind of aware of them. They're having fun. At one point we look up and there is a toddler. This kid's probably 18 months old, has walked out halfway down the lane. He has just, and there's a little line. You're not supposed to cross that foul line. This little guy has gone halfway down the lane. Well, his mom had been opening a Capri Sun or something for somebody else. She looks up and y'all, he is halfway down there. And of course, like any parent would, she's panics. She doesn't think, and she takes off running after him. Well, what you might guess, the bowling lanes are greased. There's a reason you don't walk on those. She takes off running and makes it maybe a step and a half. She wipes out y'all, feet in the air, bum on the ground, and then she gets a strike of her little kid. She just bowls straight into him. He knocks down. They are sliding down the lane together. There's nothing any of us can do, except clap and, say great job. But you just never know. It's a fun thing. You never know what's going to happen. Now we take our kids bowling. Bowling has gotten fancy. There are no little pencils anymore. There's no paper. It's all electronic. It does all the tallying for you. It sets the pins up automatically. It's a whole different experience. But there are 2 things that have not changed about bowling. The same thing it's always been. Number 1 thing that's not changed about bowling, the shoes. Y'all, we have sent people to the moon, and we can't figure out bowling shoes. I don't know. It's the same shoes that it's always been. They are ugly. They're weird. They ask you sizes, but it's just the same shape. Your foot just kind of sits in there. They don't fit anyone, and they're not comfortable, but they're very serious about the shoes. You have to wear the shoes if you're going to bowl. You have to have the shoes on, and you have to give the shoes back. That's also very important. When I was a kid, I went to a bowling birthday party. Now, I grew up in a small town. We had no bowling alley. We are in the town over from us, about 20 minutes away. We have gone to the community center to go bowling. So we thought it was a pretty cool birthday party. We are bowling, as well as little 7 and 8-year-olds can bowl, which is not well. And we get partway through this game, and the person comes over the little intercom. Excuse me, may I have your attention, please? The community center has received a bomb threat. We're going to need to evacuate, which already we're like, a bomb threat at the bowling alley. I swear to you, they say, but before you evacuate, please leave your bowling shoes at the door. I'm like, we're going to get blown up. Who cares? They were that serious. And I'm like, don't you want to, the shoes would be fine if we take them with us. You can't walk on the concrete with those shoes. So that has not changed. Still very important to have those bowling shoes. You got to take care of them. You got to give them back. The second thing that has not changed about bowling, and likely even if we figure out the shoes, this part's not going to change. The ball is going to go where your thumb points it. This baffled me as a kid. If you're bowling just regular, I'm not talking about like the fancy, put your foot out behind you. I'm just talking about like regular old bowling. You're going to put 2 of your fingers in the top 2 holes. You're usually going to put your thumb in that bottom hole. You're going to hopefully have tested it so you don't stay attached to that ball when you throw it. Got to make sure your thumb's going to come out of the hole. When you bowl that ball, you see the pins straight ahead. You want to hit that head pin. You're going to try to hit the right side of it. You're going to get a strike. But if you bowl like this and your thumb goes that way, where's your ball going to go? In the gutter, right? As a kid, that blew my mind. I'm like, I was pointing. And my dad would go, no, you bowled like this. And I was not open to his coaching at that time in my life. I was not interested in his advice about how to bowl. But wherever you point that thumb, that's where the ball's going to go. And you have an intention. You mean to do this. And what you do is that. And it goes in the gutter. That has never changed about bowling. That will never change. That is just the way it's going to go. And interestingly, the same thing happens in our life with Jesus. The very same thing as throwing that bowling ball down the lane, because our life goes whichever way our heart is pointing. We may have whatever intention, we may have whatever plan, but our life is only going to follow the path and the trajectory that our heart is pointing. It's not possible for it to go another direction because our heart is what is guiding us into the way that we go. You might come upon obstacles in your life, but even the way you go around, over, or through those obstacles has to do with where your heart is pointed. In this series, it's called Follow Me. And through this season of Lent, which is the period of weeks leading up to Easter, through Lent, we've been looking at the call stories of various people in the New Testament, people that Jesus said, hey, I want you to come follow me. We've been looking at those stories. And in those types of stories, there's 3 main kind of characters or groups of people that might be in that. One is the person who's getting called. So maybe it's Nathaniel or it's John or whoever. They're getting called to follow Jesus. And we've been looking at some of those stories. Another group of people is people that they encounter along the way. They are literally following Jesus. They are walking around with him while he's teaching and preaching. And then the third group of people is this group that is amassing with Jesus, the people that over time are following him. So we spent the majority of our time in this series on that first group, people who are being called to follow him, and we will do more of that in this series. But today we're going to check in on those other 2 groups, the people that they encounter along the way, and then the people that are following Jesus over this period of time. So we're going to pick up today in Luke chapter 12, which if you brought your Bible, you can flip to that. You can do it on the app on your phone, but I'll also have it on the screen. So you'll be able to follow along either way. So when we're picking up, Jesus and his disciples, they've been traveling together. Jesus is healing, he's teaching, he's preaching, and the disciples are taking this all in and they're learning things. And oftentimes Jesus will speak to a crowd and he will teach the crowd something or tell them something by what he's preaching. But then a lot of times he will then have a side conversation with the disciples. He'll take it a little deeper. He'll explain it a little more. He'll give it even more context. You all have done this. Sometimes you'll go and you'll have an experience with your family or your friends. But then when you get in the car, you're going to debrief it, right? You're going to talk about it more. That's kind of the situation you see happening with Jesus. He'll teach something and then he'll turn to his disciples and go, and then what you really need to know also is, and this is kind of one of those moments. Jesus is having an interaction with the crowd, and then he's stepping into a deeper conversation with his closest followers. So we're going to pick up with what's happening in Luke chapter 12, starting in verse 13. Someone in the crowd said to Jesus, Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me. I love the guts of this guy who's like, I got to get somebody on my side. I'm going to get Jesus on my side, because if Jesus tells my brother to do this, he's going to have to. So this guy says, Jesus, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me, because they've been having some kind of disagreement. Jesus replied, man, who appointed me a judge or arbiter between you? Then Jesus said to them, watch out, be on your guard against all kinds of greed. Life does not consist in an abundance of possessions. And then he told them this parable. Now, if you are newer to reading the Bible, or even if you've been reading the Bible for a while, this word parable is a flag to you to pay attention. Jesus is shifting the way that he's talking. Parable is a story. Jesus has told them something already. He's like, watch out, life doesn't consist of the abundance of your possessions. But then he's going to go a little further, and he's going to explain that idea through a story. Going to use some type of illustration. So it says, then he told them this parable. The ground of a certain rich man yielded an abundant harvest. He thought to himself, what should I do? I don't have a place to store all my crops. Then he said, this is what I'll do. I'll tear down my barns, and I'll just build bigger ones. And there I will store my surplus grain. And I'll say to myself, you have plenty of grain laid up for many years. Take it easy. Eat, drink, and be merry. But God said to him, you fool, this very night your life will be demanded of you. Then who will get what you have prepared for yourself? This is how it will be with whoever stores up things for themselves, but is not rich toward God. So we'll pause there, because there's this man in the crowd who wants Jesus to weigh in on a disagreement between him and his brother. He and his brother are disagreeing about money. And Jesus addresses that, but does something different. He tells them a story, and he tells this story about a guy who has such a good year of harvest that he has so much harvest from his crops that he doesn't even have room to keep it all. And so this guy decides, great, I'll just build bigger barns, keep it all, and then I'll never have to work again a day in my life. I got it made. But what the man doesn't know is his life is almost to its end. And all that stuff, he's not going to be able to use it all. It's going to go to waste. What's he stored it all for, Jesus is asking. And the lesson that Jesus hands the crowd and to the people listening is, you want to live your life being rich toward God and not towards the world. You want to make sure that the wealth that you're building up in life is the wealth of God and not the wealth of the world. So he gives this really important message to the crowd. He's asking, you need to think about what your life is pointing towards. Does your life point toward wealth or status, or does your life point toward God? Jesus is making a clear point to the crowd that the kind of riches that matter long term is not the stuff that the world cares about. In the end, the stuff that's going to matter is the wealth of God, which is grace and forgiveness and love and mercy. And that is something that even all these hundreds of years, thousands of years later, can apply to those of us today. Now, the people Jesus is talking to, not all of those people are his followers. Some of the people in that crowd, maybe even the guy that asked the question, they're not Christ followers, they're just people who he's encountering. And so there are also people here today or listening who have not made a decision to follow Jesus yet. They're curious, or they're interested, or maybe they got drugged here, I don't know. But they're not yet followers of Jesus, and maybe you're one of those people. But that means that this still applies to you. This is still a helpful set of information from Jesus for your life, because Jesus is saying, look, if you want your life to count, don't build bigger barns. You got to learn to share. Because if you want to be rich in life, you want to be rich about the stuff that matters, about the stuff that's meaningful, and that applies to everybody. That is one of Jesus' messages that could apply to anybody of any background, somebody that hasn't even accepted Jesus as their Savior yet. Jesus says, you know what? If you want your life to count, you got to make sure you learn to share. You got to be rich in the things that are going to matter, the things that are going to last, and generosity and grace and mercy and all of these things. So Jesus gives this general message, something that we can take something from today, certainly. But then he turns to his disciples, and he's going to go deeper with them. So those of us in here and listening who are Christ followers, we need to be listening to this part too, this sort of deeper step into what Jesus wants us to know. And this starts in verse 22, goes through verse 34. Then Jesus says to his disciples, so to the smaller group of people, therefore I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat, or about your body, what you will wear. For life is more than food, and the body is more than clothes. Consider the ravens. They don't sow or reap. They have no storeroom or barn, yet God feeds them. And how much more valuable you are than birds. Who of you by worrying can add a single hour to your life? Since you cannot do this very little thing, then why do you worry about the rest? Consider how the wildflowers grow. They don't labor or spin. Yet I tell you, not even Solomon in all his splendor was dressed like one of these. If that's how God clothes the grass of the field, which is here today and tomorrow is thrown into the fire, how much more will he clothe you, you of little faith? Don't set your heart on what you'll eat or drink. Don't worry about it. For the pagan world runs after such things, and your Father knows that you need them. But seek his kingdom, and these things will be given to you as well. Don't be afraid, little flock, for your Father has been pleased to give you the kingdom. Sell your possessions, give them to the poor. Provide purses for yourself that won't wear out, a treasure in heaven that will never fail, where no thief comes near and no moth destroys. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Jesus has already made the point that if you want to be rich in life, don't worry about the riches of this world. You focus on the riches of God. And then he goes deeper with his followers. And he says, if you want to follow Jesus, you got to check and see where your heart is pointed. Jesus doubles down. He goes even further with those of us that are his followers. These are people who are committed to him. It's the disciples. It's us. It's the ones who've said yes to following Jesus. This second part we've got to tune into because there's two important things he's telling us that we need to hear. And the first is that you can trust God's plans. You can trust God's plans for your life. We worry, we manage, we plan, we fret. I would love to meet someone who by worrying added an hour to their life. I haven't met anyone yet. In fact, many of us who have spent time worrying have subtracted time from our life because we wasted it on worrying. We used up valuable time that we've been given by worrying over things that we have no control, by planning and managing and trying to do every little thing. And Jesus kind of gives us the line that Dr. Phil, is famous for, like, how's that working for you? Jesus is like, you've spent a lot of time worrying and fretting and planning and managing. How's that going? Has that gotten you anywhere? Has that ever solved one of your problems? Jesus says, look, if you don't have enough, God's going to provide. And if you have too much, instead of building a bigger barn, you should share it. Now, I don't know how much agriculture we have in the Cokesbury congregation. I don't know how much of you do agriculture for a living. Some of you might. But in our time, it's like the equivalent of, like, if you've got so much stuff that you need to, get a storage unit because you can't keep it all, maybe let's think about sharing. If you've got so many cars and so much stuff, you need a bigger garage, maybe we think about sharing it. Right? If you've got so much money that you need to find new ways to invest it or put it somewhere, maybe think about sharing. Jesus is saying we can trust that God is going to provide for us. The thing that is difficult about human life is that we don't know how many years that we get. Some of us will be lucky to live into old age. Others of us will have the experience that somebody we love or our own life will be cut shorter than we wish that it was. But none of us know which one we're going to be. And so Jesus is saying that the best thing to do is to trust in God's provision and plan for your own life and not worry about all those other circumstances that you can't control. At Cokesbury, we're really lucky to get to walk with many of you in some of the best moments of your life, when you're welcoming a new life into your family or you're getting married or something really cool is happening. But we also have the honor of walking with many of you during really hard parts of your life. And I've been around hospice nurses and people who work with people who are at the end of their life. And you'll often hear one of the hospice workers say, well, this person is close to the end of their life. It could be a week, it could be a month, it could be a day. And I've heard them say that many times, and it's because there's not an exact science to this. We want there to be. We want a spreadsheet. We want a timeline. But the truth is, we don't know how many days that we get. All the more reason to make them count. All the more reason to live a life of appreciation and gratitude for what we have. All the more reason to trust in the provision that God is going to provide for the days that God is going to give us. So Jesus is saying, trust in God. You can trust in God's plan. But the second thing that Jesus is telling those of us who are following him is you need to invest in treasure that will last. You need to invest in things that are going to matter. And even, thousands of years ago when Jesus is saying this to people who are standing around with him, there would have been societal pressures or pull or influence to have certain things or be a certain way. We certainly experience it now. I think this is probably a universal human experience, that we need to have this kind of house, or we need to have this kind of career, or we need to have this kind of car, or this kind of vacation, or this kind of lawn, or this kind of clothes, or whatever, technology. You could run down the list. And we can find ourselves investing in that race, the race of keeping up with the Joneses or whoever it is for you, keeping up with the thing you saw on TikTok or the thing that was advertised to you on Instagram. Like, well, maybe I do need that, and you go after all these different things that are being suggested to you. We get in this mindset, and sometimes we don't even notice that we're doing it. We look up one day and we find out that our heart is pointed toward a lot of things that aren't Jesus. And in a world where nothing is guaranteed and material things are going to fade over time, Jesus reminds us, look, no amount of stuff, no amount of money, no amount of any of it can buy security. Because in a broken world that we live in, there's always going to be unexpected things that happen. There's always going to be obstacles, and no amount of money, no amount of stuff can protect us from pain and suffering and sadness. The only true security is trusting in God. True security is knowing that no matter what obstacle I face, no matter what thing is down the road, that I will not face it alone. Because the power of God through the Holy Spirit is going to be with me and in me, and I'm going to be surrounded by a community of other Christians who are part of this family of God who are going to help pick me up. True security isn't in money. It isn't in stuff. True security is trusting in God and investing in the things that are going to last. That means caring about the things that God cares about. Now, it doesn't in this passage list out all the things that God cares about. There's tons of other places in the Bible that those lists do exist. But you can imagine, many of you who've been following Jesus, you can imagine what those things are. Things that matter to God. Loving ourselves, loving God, loving our neighbor. Those are big ones. At Cokesbury, you often will hear us say, love God, love people, share hope. These are things that matter to God. It matters to God that we share what we have with the people around us who are in need. It matters to God that we forgive each other when we make mistakes. It matters to God that we offer mercy and grace to people who are in need. It matters to God if we form relationships and then deepen those relationships. But the fact of life is that wherever our heart is pointed, that's where our life is going to go. And I ask you to start considering that question, and I want you to hear it as a non-judgmental question. It's not like, well, if your heart is pointed toward wealth and status and all that stuff, like shame on you, you really blew it. No, it's not a judgmental question at all. It is a self-reflective question for those of us who are followers of Jesus Christ. To have an inventory and an evaluation of ourselves. It's something we can do daily or weekly or monthly or quarterly, whatever works for you. But to think about, we've got one life, so why wouldn't we be checking in on ourselves to see, what do I care about the most? What is my heart pointed to today? Where is my life headed? What is my focus? There's two really easy ways to check this if you're not sure how to kind of assess that for yourself. If you want to do this afternoon, after we get done here, you get home, you could check two places first. You could check your calendar from the last 30 days and your bank account for the last 30 days. Those aren't the only indicators, but there's a starting point to say, what have I been spending my time on? What have I been spending my money on? These are two good early indicators of where my heart is pointed. And I know that there is a tendency to feel shame and guilt and regret. And I just want to free us all of that, because that's not what God is asking of us. That's not going to get us anywhere. We have the forgiveness that comes through the power of the cross, and we can have a fresh start any day that we want it. So we can start to think about, where is my treasure? Where is my heart pointed toward? What are the things that are most important to me? If my heart is pointed toward getting the approval of other people, that's where my life is headed. If my heart is pointed toward ultimate career aspirations or money or status or wealth, that's the direction that my life is going to take. If my heart is pointed toward absolute safety and security, that's where my life is headed. But there's other things we could treasure. There's other places we could point ourselves. We can point ourselves in the direction of wholeness and recovery and healing. And we can pursue that path that God leads us on. And that's where our life will head. We can point our life toward community and connection. and that's where our life will head. We can point ourselves toward growing and learning and taking next steps, and that's where our life will head. And obstacles are going to come regardless of what path we're on. We're going to experience obstacles, but if our heart is pointed toward Christ, when we meet those obstacles, we're not going to be alone, because we will be following Jesus, and Jesus will help lead us through those difficult times that we're all going to face. None of us are immune to that. And there's some of you that maybe as you're assessing what is my heart pointed to, what path I'm on, you're going to realize I'm not following Jesus. I've never followed Jesus. And you could make a decision today to say, I want to start following Jesus. You can pray about that today. And if you're a person who has been following Jesus and you look up and you think, I don't know where I am. I don't know what path I'm meant to be on the path of following Jesus, but I'm not sure where I am now. You can find your way back to that path of following Jesus today. We often think about following Jesus as a one-time decision, a thing that we do one time. We say, yes, I'm going to be a follower of Jesus. And we do say yes the first time to following Jesus, but it's actually a decision we have to make every single day. When you think about driving your car somewhere, if you're going to drive across the country, the very first day you get in the car, you know where you're headed, but every time you stop and start again, you got to make sure you're on that correct path. You got to make sure you're still headed where you want to go. When we think about being followers of Jesus and we ask ourselves honestly, where is my heart pointed? Where am I going? That's when we can start to realize, am I following Jesus or am I just following the stuff that the world says is important? It's okay when we look up and we realize we're on the wrong path. Jesus provides a way back for us. Jesus is the way back for us because God knew that humanity was on a path away from him. And through the power and the death and the resurrection of Jesus Christ, God gave us a forever path back to him. God created the path back to himself through Jesus. So no matter how many exits you have taken, no matter how far you find yourself from where you really mean to be, it's okay. God says, look, all you need to do is get your eyes focused on Christ and keep following me. And then y'all, when we see one another having tripped or fallen down, we stop and we give a hand and we help somebody stand back up. And we help somebody keep following that path. And we trust that when we're wandering off, somebody that loves us, somebody in the family of God is going to say, hey, come on back. Come on back to the path of following Jesus. That's what this community of faith is all about. So in a minute, the band's going to lead us in our last song, and we're going to have a chance to think and pray and reflect. And if you want to, you can come down here and pray. You can pray right where you are. If you're driving or you're at home, wherever, you can pray where you are. You can pray to accept the gift of Jesus Christ today. You can pray about getting back on track, just being back where you want to be. You can pray about some of the things you've been treasuring that you're ready to just lay down, that you realize that these are things the world treasures and maybe not things that God treasures, and you want to recalculate that investment. Or maybe you just want to say, God, I'm just waking up again today, grateful for life, and I want to follow you again. But I invite each of us to the honest assessment today to ask, what is my heart pointed towards? And is that going to lead me ultimately where I want to go? Let's pray. God, those of us that are your followers, we want to follow you. We want to be on your path. And God, sometimes we get lost and we wander off. And God, give us the courage today to stand back up, to find your path, to invest in the things that matter to you, so that we can store up treasures in heaven, things that are going to last forever, things that have eternal impact. God, release us of any shame or guilt or regret that we might have for choices that we've already made that we cannot change. Help us, God, to make a new choice today, to walk forward in your grace and peace. For it's in the name of Jesus Christ we are all praying, and all God's people said, amen.